You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast.
Have you ever wished you could save the entire planet from an invading army of space aliens with just a bow and arrow? If so, you have found the right podcast. Welcome to Systematic Geekology, episode 19. We're going to do a character deep dive on Marvel's favorite archer, Hawkeye. I am Will Rose. I'm a Lutheran pastor in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and really excited for this episode today where we can talk about a character that I knew some about, but in preparing for this podcast, grew to know and love even deeper. So, glad to be with you.
I am Joe. I am a broadcaster and marketer, and I am coming at this with an interesting combination of some nostalgia, but also learning new aspects of this corner of the Marvel universe. So I'm excited for this.
Yeah, and so this is this podcast, this episode is for everyone, is for beginners. If you know a lot about Hawkeye or know nothing about Hawkeye, this is a podcast for you. We will be talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe Disney Plus TV show Hawkeye, the first and second episodes. So if you haven't watched those episodes yet, there'll probably be some spoilers later on in this conversation about those episodes. So go back and watch that and come back. But yeah, we're basically going to talk about Hawkeye and his place in the pantheon of heroes in the Marvel universe and even in DC and all heroes really. And why would you ever bring a bow and arrow to a superhero mystical magic fight? Well, you know, he's an everyman or every woman. He is a hero who brings a bow and arrow because he's a good shot and he doesn't need all the magical weapons, and that's kind of who he is. So yeah, let's dive in to the character of Hawkeye and where his history and where he shows up in the universe. Did a little digging, and his first appearance is in Tales of Suspense in 1964. Tales of Suspense. Issue 57. So, you know, Joe, you were saying that there's another character in the DC universe that you're a big fan of who also happens to be an archer. Who would that be?
So I am a huge fan of Green Arrow. I have been for years. And to me, that whole idea of somebody that it has all of the skills to be a hero, but is a maybe a reluctant hero at best, and at other times struggles with not being the villain sort of thing. And so for me, that was that I really enjoyed that character. So when I found out that Marvel had their version of an everyman archer sort of thing, I was absolutely drawn to that character. But for me, it's funny. I look back on how my opinions have changed and things like that. And I remember being a kid and seeing Hawkeye for the first time, and I'm like, why is this guy wearing purple with a weird thing on his face, totally ignoring that the other one is in like lime green? You know what I mean? Like, not that's not weird, but purple, that's a bridge too far. Says
with a feather in his cap, right?
Yeah, exactly. Says the guy with the purple beard. So there's that.
And so Marvel were like, hey, we need an archer too, so why don't we create one? So they created Hawkeye on that Tales of Suspense, and then he joined the Avengers in Avengers number 16 in 1965, a year later. So DC had their Arrow guy. Here comes Hawkeye, who is their Arrow guy. But yeah, he has this crazy outfit because he's from the circus. His background is that he was orphaned at 8 years old and fell into being a circus act and trained by this trick shot or sharpshooter called the swordsman. And so he was trained to be a sharpshooter. So he's used to being kind of circus clothes in a circus act, entertaining everyone with how good he is with a bow and arrow or any kind of object that can be used as kind of a target or sharpshooter.
Right. You look at some of the mainstays that in 2021, almost 2022, it's hard to think back or even realize that some of these mainstays have their own roots and have their own histories and origin points and things like that. Characters like Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, but when you look back at at the history of these characters, people appreciated them. You take the Fantastic Four, for example. People appreciated them because you saw in those books family dynamics. It was like everyday family issues, but with superpowered individuals. Same thing with Spider-Man. There's a reason why so many people relate with Spider-Man as this kid, even though in the comics he hasn't been a kid in decades at this point. That because when these stories are first coming out, you have this true to heart coming of age story, and you have it's relatable, and that's something that Marvel, for as much grief as I give them, has been able to consistently provide very well for its listeners. If you want, or for its readers, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. I might not be out there, trying to be a vigilante or whatever, but I certainly understand that there are aspects of my personality, there are aspects of my skill set that could be used for the kingdom, for the glory of God, or specifically for very selfish gains, for monetary gains, for self advancement, I guess. And so I think on some level, some more than others can relate with this character that didn't start off mustache twirling. You know what I mean? As the the big bad, and suddenly you're brought to see the error of your ways, sort of thing. No, this was kind of a gradual thing. This is kind of a reluctant sort of thing, more of just a way of life sort of deal than necessarily trying to go out there and dominate the world and things like that. So much of the soup of the day on both sides of the aisle is mustache twirling and big bombastic characters and capes and gods and all of this kind of stuff. And you have this dude. I'm taken back to the scene between Jeremy Renner and Scarlet Witch in Age of Ultron, where he's giving her the pep talk, and he's like, I'm about to go out there and fight these guys. I've got a bow and arrow. None of this makes sense. You know what I mean? But it's a perfect illustration of a guy that's just using what he can to fight the good fight.
Yeah, and I think Marvel leaned into, like you said, the relationships that affect us. So the more relational aspect of these heroes. The heroes, yes, they have powers. They're fighting evil. They are wrestling with what their purpose in the world or in their universe. But they also have deep relationships, whether it's their aunt or whether it's their family or it's their sisters or or with their team that they're teaming up with. They really lean into this aspect of we're all in relationships with one another, and I think that's what as people of faith and involved with faith communities, that it's not just me and God. It's just not me and Jesus, but I am in a relationship with others and building a kingdom that people have used so often, that we're all this kinship among us as human beings. And so Marvel has leaned into that over the years. And like you said, Hawkeye has always been that kind of, he's Marvel's arrow guy, but there's also this self-awareness that he's realizing that he's bringing this kind of ancient, archaic weaponed to a modern day fight with all these superheroes. So he's often kind of self-deprecating or feelings of unappreciated, but he also knows he has the skill. He's been trained by Captain America on how to fight. He knows how to handle his own when it comes to a fight, but he also deeply loves those around him. So I think that's kind of the heart of this character, and what makes him so lovable is the fact that he is kind of everyman. If he can be on the Avengers, anybody can be Avengers. And in fact, in the Marvel spinoff 1984 West Coast Avengers, they have the spinoff book where he is Hawkeye, who's leading the Avengers, except on the West Coast in San Francisco. And there's a page right on the second page. He's kind of talking with Mockingbird, his wife, and they're kind of like, "Who, me? Why am I a part of the Avengers? Do I have the gifts or the ability or experience to do this?" And he goes, "Hey, if I can be Avenger, anyone can, right?" And he even almost breaks the fourth wall and looks past the panel at the reader. And so in the movies, in the comics, he's the one who's like, yeah, I maybe can't be Captain America. I didn't take a super soldier serum. I didn't get radiated by gamma rays and become the Hulk, or bit by a spider, or rich enough to where I can create this armor suit. But I can look at Hawkeye and go, yeah, maybe I could be Avenger, with whatever gifts I have and bring to the table.
And that's something that I would dare say, and mark your calendars, that I'm actually giving Marvel the nod on something over DC. But I would go as far as to say that with the Hawkeye character, Marvel was able to accomplish a level of everyman presentation that DC has not necessarily ever been able to match in the same kind of way. I like all of the trimmings as far as Green Arrow, the universe that he sits in, all of those kinds of things. But when it comes to characters like Oliver Queen, like Bruce Wayne, these non-powered characters, they always fall back on the MacGuffin of they're billionaires. They're just rich. And we all know being rich is in fact a superpower. Like there's just a litany of other things available to you if there's enough zeros at the end of your bank account.
Like going to space. We have billionaires in our own universe who can go to space if they want to.
Exactly. So DC hasn't been able to present this character that, like Marvel, where they can make you appreciate this character to such a degree that you can, live vicariously, I guess, to an extent through this character. You know what I mean? Like, if they can, like you were saying, if they can do it, I can do it, sort of thing. It's kind of like, for my generation, the big one is the Power Rangers, right? When we were kids, you're like, that's, you envisioned yourself as one of these kids because it was one of those situations where it was just everyday people that, it wasn't some mutant, it wasn't some, superpowered individual. It was just everyday people. And that's something that has, if anything, been taken up a notch with the MCU presentation of Hawkeye for me, that just head and shoulders, like one of easily top three. Absolutely would hear an argument for the best character within the MCU. Not coolest, not flashiest, but when you're talking about out and out character, I would put him right at the top of that pile. And I think a big part of that, like we're saying, is you looking back at just how rich the history is for this character, and how he's been everything from a villain to a leader, that there's just so much to pull from that makes you care.
Right. And this is that call story, like you said, you alluded to it, the call story of of being called to something greater than myself, that they're part of these books. And that's a part of scripture in the Bible as well, whether it's Moses or Peter or the prophets, others that feel like maybe they don't quite matter, just an everyday fisherman. Oh, wow, here comes this guy calling me to join on the team and be a part of something higher. The kingdom of God has come near, and this rabbi wants me to be a part of it. Wow, what do I have that can bring to the table and brings out the best in us to come and be a part of that? So that call story is a big part of these two. And so yeah, as we talk about Marvel and these characters that become relatable, that become part of like the everyday struggle or the relationships of family, Marvel has the same, once they have a long history, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of their characters, they also wrestle with, like DC, how do we identify or attract younger readers? And so kind of the history of Hawkeye in the comics, we have, he was in Tales of Suspense, then Avengers, then he had his own limited series in 1983, then the West Coast Avengers 1984. And then it looks like I found a series that I actually had in some of my boxes, a limited series in 1994, which is a more gritty. If we know the comics in the 90s, it was more of a gritty. He's almost like they try to make him like a Wolverine or a Punisher kind of character. And then in 2005, Marvel releases a book called The Young Avengers. And again, they're youngifying, if that's even a word, the Avengers to make, hey, they're not just sidekicks, but here are some characters that are similar to the Avengers that we can have younger readers identify with. And it's within that book that you have the first appearance of Kate Bishop, who would eventually become another version of Hawkeye in the Young Avengers and is in this new TV series on Disney+. So her first appearance was in Young Avengers in 2005. So yeah. I mean, I think we look at him and there are parts where he is an everyday guy with the arrow, but there's parts in the comics when he does have like a sky cycle. He flies around on this sky motorcycle and he has the trick arrows. He has the loud costume. How does he stand out in the midst of a lot of people who have a lot of big powers and big money? Well, they found ways to do this. He hasn't always had his own series over, throughout the years. He's come and gone with little series to kind of lean into it, but he's died a couple times and they brought him back a couple times, just like all heroes. But then his Marvel Cinematic Universe first appearance was in the first Thor movie. And so you have S.H.I.E.L.D. surrounding this hammer that's in the ground, and they're like, someone's coming to get it. What is this thing? And the first time we see Hawkeye in the MCU is he's perched up high, looking down, ready to take out whoever gets near that hammer or is a threat to the universe or to S.H.I.E.L.D. or to the United States.
Yeah. It's really something special when comic book creators can find that line between, I can put this character in bombastic situations that are with larger than life characters and they fit in and it makes sense and it's compelling, but can also create these storylines that have to do with raw human emotion and experience. I'm drawn to, you were going through the comic book history of Hawkeye, and I'm drawn to Matt Fraction's run on Hawkeye as absolutely the pinnacle of down-to-earth storytelling in a world that's anything but down to earth. During that whole period of Hawkeye's story where he is the Ronin, chef's kiss. Like, you're talking about somebody who's taken to the brink of what breaks a man. You know what I mean? Like, not to go over to the Joker side, but all it takes is one bad day. You know what I mean? How far can a person be pushed before they break? And if you break and you have all of these skills, what do you do with that? What happens? You know what I mean? And I think that comics are at their best when they're willing to ask those questions, to push those boundaries, to be able to ask morally relevant questions of the reader and make the reader think, what if I was this guy who was pushed to a breaking point, and, how would I react to that?
Yeah, and I think, man, boy, over the last couple of years, how we've all been kind of pushed to a breaking point, whether you're in ministry or whether you're working or whether you're a nurse or you're a frontline worker or whether you're a police officer. I mean, these kinds of things, anybody, you're a stay-at-home parent trying to get your kids through school, online school. Like we're pushed to our breaking point. And so, yeah, one bad day could push us over the edge. And part of these stories we identify with and the movies that we watch is, yeah, we're entertained by them, but they also help us process our own human emotion and how we navigate this world and what that means for us. So yeah. And as you watch this Hawkeye show, yeah, the source material, it's not word for word, it's not panel by panel, but it's right out of this Matt Fraction, David, how do you say his last name? Aja, A-G-A?
I believe so.
Aja, and then the name of the book is Hawkeye: My Life as a Weapon, and you see how he gets beat up, he's bruised, he has to go to the doctor, he's cut up, but he's also takes on a bunch of 8 ninjas by being tied to a chair. So you see what he can do also with his skill, and he's mentoring Kate Bishop. She goes back way to 2005 in Young Avengers, but then there's 8 years there of her storyline and encountering Hawkeye for the first time, and then this Matt Fraction run is just an awesome way to see how he takes her under his wing and how not only does she help him, he helps her, and that kind of mutual relationship, the dynamics of these relationships, how you can care for one another. So yeah, that is a highly recommended read if you like comics, like graphic novels, watch this show and want to look at the source material. That's the way to go for sure. So he, going back to this, he showed up in a Thor movie. He showed up in a couple movies, and then here comes 2012, the Avengers. They come together, and he is, similar to Black Widow. She's got a pistol, he's got a bow and arrow, and they're fighting an army of aliens come out of a portal to take over the world.
Absolutely, and to me, it asks questions that as humans, it should make us uncomfortable because it requires us to think, right? Many of us out there, especially those of us who were not inclined to be the good guy our whole lives, tend to have a past. Tend to think that whole, taking a walk down memory lane can get very, very complicated very, very quickly. And
what triggers those too for you? Like anything he went to go just see a musical of the Avengers.
Right.
And as he's watching this play on stage, he's triggered because of things. And same way, whatever you're wrestling with or trauma you have, you never know when that can prop back up in your own life too. Right.
Right.
And what to do with that.
And it becomes very easy to start asking questions like, do I deserve to be forgiven? Do I deserve to have, the love of my family, to have good things like this stable? And then on the other side, just thirsting for that sense of normalcy. You know what I mean? Right. Like leave the nonsense behind, leave all of whatever that is in the past, and just so cling to what you have now because you understand what life looks like without those things. You know what I mean? It's why I often say that, faith is best tested under extreme circumstances, because it shows you what life looks like without God and how truly horrific that is.
Yeah. And I think, what this show's also going to do that I like to see is that dynamic of kind of an older, jaded, maybe somewhat cynical older dude with a younger person who's very idealistic and is looking at the world's their oyster. So the tension between the two, this older dude who's like, oh man, I've been there back. I don't want to keep doing this, to a younger person who's like, yeah, the whole world's ahead of me and I want to be like you. And the tension between the two, because as I get older and in ministry, there's times when I'm like, oh my gosh, I've seen it all. What am I doing? But then to see someone coming out of seminary and be like, they're just so ready to take on the world. You're like, yeah, I need that energy. Help me, infuse me with more idealism and what can be done in a world, or feed me with that hope that we had kind of long for. So that dynamic between Clint and Kate will be fun to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I made a joke to my wife when we were watching these that dynamic between the two very much reminded me of the last leg of my time in the restaurant business. I was a chef for over a decade and ran restaurants across the country. And I remember towards the back nine of my time in the kitchen that these CA grads would come in, full of, pep and not understanding what the restaurant business does to you.
Do you know what you've gotten yourself into?
Exactly. And you just you want to look at them like the grizzled old vet that doesn't want to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But and for me, that was exactly when I knew it was time for me to hang up the apron and leave the restaurant business behind. But yes, that is something that, I think it's, again, to go back to that whole relatability thing, I really think even with the most bombastic of characters, the best stories are told when they have an air of relatability to them. When you boil it down to concepts that anybody can wrestle with.
Yeah, so I got back got back into comics like the early 2000s and through. And so right when they kind of dismantled or disassembled the Avengers, and then had new Avengers, and then they had a young Avengers, and then they rebooted Hawkeye, all these storylines were really kind of like, oh, wow, just diving real deep into these comics. So the character at the end of episode 2 is this character called Echo. Right. And she's a deaf Native American who has powers similar to that of Daredevil, where Daredevil, his senses are enhanced because he can't see. Her senses are enhanced because she can't hear. So her name is Echo in a sense that she can mimic, almost like Taskmaster, mimic and mirror what you do. So if you're a great fighter, she can copy exactly what you're doing in front. So she was actually introduced in the Daredevil universe in the comics and had a connection to Kingpin. So I don't know if they're going to lean that into New York, if this is how the present day MCU or Disney Plus is going to reintroduce Daredevil or Kingpin because of Echo's background, but that's something to think about. I'm not going to look for legacy characters under every rock and every Disney Plus TV show, because I think we get caught, oh man, maybe it's Mephisto this time. But no, but it could be a Daredevil or a Kingpin connection. But Echo's a cool character I like in the Marvel universe that's been put in, who has been Ronin before, who's been a part of the New Avengers before, who's a neat character that I can't wait to see what they do with her. She's definitely an anti-hero. She has a grit to her, at least the end of this, the second episode. So I don't know if they'll pull her in as kind of a quasi-hero or just keep her a villain or what. But that's got me, that last page reveal has got me, can't wait till Wednesday night to see what episode 3 going to happen to episode 3.
Yeah, I'm low-key very much excited for, trying not to fall into the trap of, trying to guess what's coming down the pike sort of thing. I've been saying, especially with everything post Endgame, people just need to calm down when it comes to
enjoy the ride. Enjoy the ride.
Yeah. But seeing either or both Daredevil and Kingpin on, mix it up with the main characters, awesome, because both of those characters are very well done by the actors that portray them.
So yeah, and so we'll say that episodes 1 and 2 are fun. Our plan for Systematic Ecology is to do kind of a Patreon after show for episode 3 and then the following episodes. So we invite you to support us on Patreon. If you want those extra feeds, then join us on Patreon, and then we'll put out those extra shows and after shows where we discuss the TV shows as they come out in the weeks ahead. We have at least right up to Christmas. We got 4 more episodes and 4 more weeks, and so we'll see how this unfolds and how it ties to the whole universe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's pull on some scripture. We like to pull scripture into our conversation when we discuss these things that we geek out on, and so I found everyone's favorite book, Lamentations chapter 3, verse 12. God bent God's bow and set me as a target for the arrow. Now, if you go back and read Lamentations chapter 3, it's pretty depressing because as we talked about earlier, that capture the raw human emotion. Lamentations, all joking aside, is a book that gives a voice to our feelings and frustrations that the world is against us. And sometimes we feel that God is against us, that God is making us a target of some divine wrath. And so this person, whoever authored Lamentations, is really shaking their fist at God and praying with raw human emotion. God set God's bow on me and set it as a target to me, and I feel like I'm under attack. And we've all felt that way before, that we're under attack by the world or even by God. And again, those feelings, am I worthy? What's going on? What is justice? Those questions that we all wrestle with.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest reasons why that particular section of the Bible is so thick to try and dive into is because you're talking about the honesty of emotion and the rawness of that and going there and all of those kinds of things. And so wrestling with these questions is healthy. Doing those that kind of inventory, even if everything that you find isn't good, because we are fallible creatures after all, and we are not gonna be doing everything right. But just because we find things that make us ask questions and things like that, that doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing. That's a good thing, especially if it leads us to start asking questions about this whole thing. You know what I mean? I'm taken back to when I first got saved, and after some godly men in my life helped me away from some false gospels, like the prosperity gospel, things like that I had fallen into, and I was literally the perfect mark for. It left me with, okay, so I survived being sick, and now I've got this relationship. What next? You can't tell me that this is just 70, 80 years of slogging through garbage in order to get to the good stuff afterwards. And that forces you to ask questions, to poke and to prod. You know what I mean? And that is a good thing to do, especially if you are somebody who has a preponderance of backstory leading into a relationship with God. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of other stuff there that, as it doesn't matter where you move to, it doesn't matter what if you change your location, if you change your occupation, if you get married or if you don't, if you cross that threshold from non-believer to kingdom citizen, then you've got to unpack those things with God. And that's uncomfortable, and that's hard, and that's especially if it's some of the more extreme examples of how that can go and things like that. So it's if being able to say that you can relate in a way with these kinds of feelings that are contained in this portion, the feelings that are portrayed in this portion of scripture, understand that that just means that you are human. These were humans that wrote this, divinely inspired, but humans that wrote this. And so the through line tracks that this is just humanity. This is a byproduct of being people, being creatures that are inclined to serve self and thus sin.
Right, and the mark of a deep, authentic relationship is being able to be honest with what we're truly feeling. And I think Lamentations is one of those books where they're being brutally honest with their God of what they're feeling, what they're going through, and the raw human emotion that goes with it. And we're talking about bow and arrows and targets. Often I've heard that sin is just missing the mark. Humans, no matter how accurate we feel like we are with the bow and arrow or darts or cornhole or whatever you're doing, we're not perfect. We're not going to have a hole in one every time. We're not going to hit the bullseye every time. Sin is just missing the mark, and we miss the mark. Humans have a knack of turning tools into weapons, and so it's not God who are doing these things. Destruction is us that turns tools into weapons against other people. Tools that are maybe used for hunting, to eat, to survive. We then turn on other people and other tribes to exploit them. So that's the mark of sin, is missing the mark and turning good human tools into weapons against one another. And I truly believe that God's true target for us is our heart, and God's arrows is mercy, love, and grace. It's not wrath, it's not judgment. It's love, mercy, and grace, and our hearts are the one that God goes after, and we're called to surrender to God in our lives. And our life is a lifelong process of training and practicing and learning and growing in community with one another on how to love one another and how to love God that first loved us.
Yeah, I think sometimes the misconception is that God takes joy in, taking care of sinners, I guess is a good way of putting it. Here's the gimmick, though.
Right.
There's a reason why God hasn't come back yet. Because we're not ready. And think about that for a second. Once he comes back, bam, done. Like the song and dance is over. Now it's time to pay the piper. Now it's time to, figure out I'm gonna say make amends for everything that's happened so far. So you look at the state of humanity, and then the state of yourself, you realize that the only way that this makes sense for me, I just had a conversation with another Kingdom dude recently about this. The only way that this whole God thing makes sense to me is if you realize, wait a minute, it's not about the rules and the regulations. It's not about the traditions. It's not about the denominations. Sorry, Pastor. It's about the relationship. It's about kingdom. The kingdom is more than just heaven. The kingdom is here. The kingdom is now. There's a present tense to that. And that means that the wonderful news, fam, is that you can have an active participatory relationship with God. And that's what God wants. And so you realize that it's not about, if I've often joked that if you are focused on hell when you're talking about Jesus, then your perspective is off. Because you're talking about the greatest thing that's ever happened to mankind versus the punishment of our own creation in a way. And that's the hell is a whole other conversation. I don't want to leave it in shorthand because what I just said isn't necessarily correct, but the original intention for hell was not a prison for sinners. It was not for a place for anybody that doesn't believe to go. That wasn't the initial, but as humans exercise their free will, you end up with what we have. And so that when you realize that, that whole wrath and judgment thing, yeah, that's a part of it. I'm not trying to play like it's not. There's judgment. There is wrath as a part of justice, but it's not like that's what God is trying for. God is trying to reconcile us to himself. He loves us so much that he has opened the door, that he has created the bridge for us to be able to reconcile this whole sin nature thing. Because otherwise, that's it. That's it as far as humanity goes. Because, we might not think that we're the worst thing in the world, but compare your rap sheet against what Jesus says, and you realize, man, that thing's a lot longer than I realized it was.
Yeah, I have a good friend who says that if your God isn't as nice and as loving as Jesus, then you probably have the wrong God. So compare your God with how Jesus operated in the world, and there you go. And I agree. Like traditions, denominations are merely tools to help us focus and practice our faith. And as we talked about humans taking tools and turning them into weapons against other people, humans have the knack of turning traditions and denominations as weapons against other people or distractions away and get in the way of our real relationship with God. So it's not traditions and denominations that are the means of salvation is God. These traditions and sacraments and expressions of the Christian tradition are merely tools to help us focus and wrap our heads and hearts around how much God loves us. And as humans do, we miss the mark and we turn them into weapons or ways to distract us or keep others out. And that's what Jesus came to save us from. And that's why we're doing communities like this, Systematic Geekology, where we can give people permission to geek out and gather in community and hold each other accountable to these things as well. Good stuff, Joe. And so as we wrap this up, again, we point you to our social media accounts and our website. If there's anything you want us to talk about or questions about Hawkeye, questions about that you want to explore in these other episodes, then let us know. And we'll dive into it. Joe, you got some recommendations of what people can dive into?
Yeah, if not to be redundant, but if you are the type of person that relates with a grittier side of comics, one that's a little bit more grounded, then absolutely seek out Matt Fraction's run on Hawkeye. It is out of bounds. Like, it's some of the best storytelling that I've found when it comes to comics. It helps that is exactly the type of comic that I really dig. So especially, if you want to, like Will said before, if you're looking for the source material, so to speak, for the Hawkeye TV show, plus or minus, like you said, not beat for beat, but definitely you will see the similarities and the through lines there. Definitely check that out.
Yeah, now Fraction, he's not necessarily in Marvel Comics. He does some independent stuff now, but his first kind of team up with the artist that's on this, I'm going to butcher his name again, but David Aja, I think it's his name. He teamed up with him with an Iron Fist run, which is really, really good. It's gritty. It's the panels are great. It's funny. It's entertaining. It's exciting. So he first teamed up with that creator, with that artist for Iron Fist, and then they collaborated again with this run on Hawkeye, and they do some good storytelling with Clint and Kate Bishop. So that's my recommendation too. Find the source material, grab it. It's not a very thick or expensive graphic novel. You can probably find it wherever you buy books or local comic book store, and it'll be a fun read.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, y'all. Until next time, peace. Let us know how you're doing and how we can keep this going in terms of the topics that you want to hear. And remember that you are a priesthood of the geeks. We're all in this together as God's chosen people.
This was an Anazao Ministries podcast. If you enjoyed this show and would like to learn more about our network, be sure to check out the Anazao Ministries Podcast Network.